Remember when we used to get excited about 4K cameras? If you had something that could give you Ultra HD, you were the coolest cucumber in the sea, and 10-bit UHD was certainly out of reach. In the very beginning of 2017, Panasonic introduced the Lumix GH5, and it was hardly an incremental step up from the super popular GH4. Not only could you shoot 4K internally, but now 4K DCI 10-bit 422 internally, as well as an improved sensor and processor, a full-size HDMI port, and the arrival of Panasonic's famously good IBIS system. At launch, the GH5 was priced at an aggressive $2,000, and 7 years later you can find them used for around $500. We're going to find out if it's a good investment in 2024, so let's start off with the design. The GH5 has a very classic SLR body made of plastic and leather texturing. I think it actually feels really good in the hand for the price, both in feel and space for your hand. There's a nice selection of buttons on the top and the back of the camera, which can be customized to anything you want. I think the default functions are logical and usually don't really change anything. There are 3 control dials for exposure, so you can map shutter, aperture, and ISO each to their own, and there's even a nice little joystick. I don't have any complaints for controls, and certainly don't for I/O either. There's 3.5mm in and out, USB-C for data and power trickle, and a full-size HDMI, which was incredibly rare at the time and unfortunately still not a given. On the other side of the camera body, you can find a dual SD card slot too. There's a wealth of rigging options available if you want to design a handheld rig too, which is nice. If you decide to pick up this camera used, thousands of filmmakers have come before you doing the same, so the used market for the GH5 and GH5 accessories is still thriving. Battery life is really nice too. We get to use Panasonic's DMW BLF19 batteries, which can get you around 2 hours of recording depending on the age and the brand of the battery. You can get battery grips pretty cheap too, and since they attach through the metal contacts in the bottom of the camera body instead of replacing the battery already in the slot, it's possible to use 3 of them at once. The GH5 is tried and true to say the least, and it's been a reliable mainstay in the filmmaking community since its introduction. The design of the camera body is classic and doesn't fuss. I don't have anything to complain about here. I used to own a GH5 back in the day when I was shooting weddings, and I got rid of it because of 2 main issues, one related to image quality and the other shooting experience, so let's start with the latter. Once you press record on the GH5, you can no longer use focus magnifier. When I'm not using an external monitor and using a camera body by itself, this is the main way I keep everything in focus. Fujifilm and Sony have been doing this for a long time, and I think Panasonic just now added this to new cameras, and Canon has yet to do it at all. There is focus peaking, but it's not really that great, which means keeping everything in focus with a minimal setup can be a little challenging. Depending on your workflow, this might not be a big issue at all, but it is something to keep in mind. Let's move on to image quality. We're looking at a 17.3 by 13mm micro four thirds sensor capable of DCI 4K at 10-bit 422 up to 400 megabits per second. If you step down to 8-bit, you can get UHD up to 60 FPS. For reference, that's a 2 times crop from large format 35mm sensors. Keep in mind this is before they introduced dual native ISOs. We'll talk more about low light performance in a second. The IBIS system is really fantastic. It's so fun to go out and use the camera without any rigging and not have to worry about weird jitters and warping. I mostly used the camera with my Summicron R50mm and it worked really great. Working with the 10-bit files is really nice and provide a ton of flexibility in post for grading. I want to jump in Resolve really quick to show a couple things, and the first thing I was really surprised at is the actual quality of the noise in the low light. I remember this being a huge complaint when the GH5 first came out, so I just put my standard node tree on here. This was recorded in Vlog, so I'm gonna go and find Panasonic V-Gamut and then Panasonic Vlog. So here's our Rec 709 image. I have film grain and a film emulation in here. We're gonna keep these off. And this is a little crunchy for me, but before I redo the contrast, I wanna turn off the grade and sort of zoom in here. And we can look at the noise pattern. This is with all noise reduction off, and I think it looks fantastic. It's so granular. The noise looks like it's on a pixel level, which is what you want to see. There's no smearing, there's no huge blocks of weird noise that it would be hard to denoise. It really does just look amazing. So I'm gonna put the grade back on, and really quick, we're just gonna throw a ramp on here. First thing I'm gonna do is go to my color correction, HDR, global exposure, and just bump it up just a touch. And then we'll go to contrast, curves, editable splines on, bring up the ultimate black point a whole bunch. Create a nice smooth curve, ease it back down to the spot that we want it at. Might make this a little smoother on the top. This was recorded at 3200 ISO. I remember people saying that you could not go over 800 on the GH5 sensor, and since it's micro four thirds, you couldn't collect any light, but I think this is perfectly usable. Really surprised at that. That's not what I was expecting. I remember it being very challenging. So what I'm going to do is save this grade to slot number 1 and move over to this next shot. Now we're on the beach, This shot is super duper blue. I'm actually going to reset that node. We'll add a little bit of warmth in, and then we'll rework our curve to match. I'm gonna bring up just a little bit. This one's at 6400 ISO at f2. I really like the look of this noise pattern. It looks super filmic to me. It was so dark you could barely even see each other. And I'm not shooting with an f1.2 or anything like that. Like I said, this is f2 on a Summicron R50mm. Let's do one more shot really quick. This is one that's not in zero lighting for once. We'll zero out everything, and we'll just do a little bit of contrast work here. Bring up the ultimate black point a little bit. Create a little bit more of a ramp. Smoothing out the shadows a touch. And there you go. The sharpness coming out of the sensor is incredible. I turned sharpness and noise reduction all the way down, and the detail that you can still get in here, it doesn't look like it's being digitally sharpened almost at all. I don't know if I just wasn't grading correctly or what the deal was, if I wasn't exposing correctly back in the day, but I don't remember the sensor looking so good. CineD clocks the sensor at around 10 to 11 usable stops of dynamic range, which is limited by today's standards. We'll need to be really intentional about how we're exposing our images to avoid clipping on either end of our waveforms. Rolling shutter comes in at around 13 milliseconds, which is a great result. You shouldn't see skewing in your shots unless you do something crazy. My other main gripe with the GH5, and the biggest reason I ended up selling it, has to do with color science. I remember it having the tendency to shift into magenta a lot of the time, especially with skin tones, but that was years ago. Maybe I'll be able to dial it in now. Alright, so we've shot everything in Vlog L here. I'm going to put my standard tree on and do nothing but unwrap to Rec 709, so Panasonic V Gamut. And then we're going to go find Vlog L. There it is. I mainly want to see if this aggressive magenta red shift that I remember experiencing in skin tones has to do with exposure. And assuming this is perfectly white balanced, it should be very, very close. There is a little bit of extra redness in the skin. That could be my skin tone. That could be the ambient environment. I have to correct this out of my skin tone on my Canon C200 always anyway. It looks pretty similar to a Canon skin tone to me here. Can go forward to where I adjust the light down. As you would expect, it does look more ruddy. It's a little bit more brown. This isn't quite as bad as I thought it was going to be. And when I turn the light up, I actually don't know if there's too aggressive of a hue shift happening here. The whole thing just feels a little bit too magenta. If you were to go into, let's go to our My Adjust, and then we'll go to Vector Scope. Go ahead and zoom in. Yeah, it's shifting a little bit. Keep your eye down here. We're sort of aiming for the skin tone line. It's definitely moving a little bit farther into red than we would prefer. Really easy way to fix this would be go to the color warper. We'll do 8. Actually, we'll do 12. Look around here. It's looking like we can maybe grab this guy. Bring him over just a little bit, and then we can turn that off and on and see what that's doing. Really, really subtle change if you're looking at the actual monitor here. But if you keep your eye on the vector scope, we're just barely nudging it towards that line. Maybe you could even do a little bit more. You should probably pull a qualifier and be way more precious about this, but just for the sake of speed here, it's pretty easy to correct that. Let's go to where the underexposure is. Yeah, it's doing a pretty good job at fixing all of it. That shift in skin tone, again, just like the low light, and the noise performance is not nearly as bad as I remember. I don't know if I'm more experienced in exposing and grading now and didn't really know what I was doing back then, which is very, very possible. I did not know the first thing about color grading or anything, how to expose log. The sensor's way better than I remember. When it was introduced, the GH5 was one of the best cameras on the market, and I still think it's pretty awesome. Although the dynamic range and color can be a bit odd, you can still get some amazing images out of this camera. I think it's a great camera for travel because of the IBIS, small size, and battery life. You don't need to bring anything but the camera, a lens, and an ND filter, and you're good to go. I really like the GH5, and it'll always have a special place in my heart. I know a lot of you have GH5 memories too, so put them below in the comments, but anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.